in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey there, friend. This is Emily Lewis, the host of the Abundant Grace podcast, and you are listening to Stealing June, a podcast.
Stealingjune.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Stealingjune, a podcast. I'm your host, Jared. Have you ever felt like you never amounted, or that you couldn't live up to God's standard? What if you're an achiever who lives for accomplished tasks and always feels like at the end of the day, you could have done more? Well, today's guest is no stranger to some of these categories. She's a fellow podcaster and a recovering achiever who now has turned her focus into coaching, helping people realize that God doesn't love conditionally and there's more to you than meets the eye. So, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Emily Lewis. Hello, Emily. Welcome to Stealingjune, a podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm awesome. Thanks, Jared. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. You know, it's kind of hard to, find, guests, I guess I could say. So having, reaching out and finding people, everything like that, I'm glad to interview anyone, I guess. So,
well, perfect. Definitely anyone.
So tell me about yourself. Where you grew up, how you were saved, how did God call you to where you're at? How'd you get started? Stuff like that.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if you have enough time for all of that, Jared.
I got time.
I grew up in a religious context that really told me what to think, how to think it, what to believe, and how to believe it. And here are the rules that you should follow. And I did my best to follow those rules. I was desperate to belong. I was desperate to find value. And the way that I found value was by fitting in with that crowd, with the church community. And I also found a lot of my value and any shred of self-worth that I had wrapped up in my ability to follow the rules, my ability to measure up. My deepest core fear was that God was going to leave me. I really thought that if I didn't measure up, if I didn't listen to this nudge or this, this condemning voice, which turns out probably wasn't even the Holy Spirit, it was the self-condemnation that I had learned. But if I didn't listen to that voice, I really felt like God would probably walk away and never speak to me again. And that's the fear that I lived with, right? So the core need that points to is my need for belonging. And I then spent a lot of energy towards that and was exhausted. But I really didn't know any different. That was just the way that things were. And I didn't really think to question it much. And any questions that did come, I buried them very quickly until I had other people speak life over me and believe in my worth and value more than I did at the time. And that was so healing to experience and to be able to heal my relationship with God and rest from all of the proving and the performing shifted how I showed up in the world. it allowed me to let go of the motivation of fear and guilt and really press into love, letting that motivate me. Because if love is actually flowing into me, it can flow out of me. And I was able to see for the first time and willing to receive, because I think a lot of us have resistance to really receiving even God's love. We resist it and we try to prove that we're worthy of it rather than saying, wow, God says that I'm worthy of his love. I'm just going to take that at face value. So the reason that I got into coaching and helping women and Christians be confident in who God says they are and everything that he's calling them to was at the time I was helping my husband lead the youth group at a church we were part of. And I just remember watching someone's eyes light up when they understood, they were starting to grasp it, that they didn't have to do anything to try to measure up or keep God happy, or they didn't have to change who they were in order for God to tolerate them, right? And just watching her eyes light up was incredible. And that was part of the start of me wanting to do that on a larger scale. And we can talk more about like how I started my podcast story too, but that's kind of in a nutshell how I grew up to why I am passionate about what I do.
So what caused, I guess, that needing to have to please God? Was it the type of church you're in, the sermons you were listening to, the people around, all the above?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely the church community, the way that things were taught. And then I think partly personality. I'm very much an achiever, very much my primary love language is quality time. So like, I think it kind of spoke to that core need, is often related to those fears that we have too. So that's why I was afraid that God was going to leave and I had to toe the line. And I saw that actually exemplified in the community, at least. Because when somebody didn't follow the rules, there were certain rules that were acceptable to break, but some of them weren't. And if you crossed certain lines, you were out. And so I watched that manifest. So that created, what's the word? It, I don't know, solidified in my mind, especially as a child, and then even into adulthood, that if I cross certain lines, then I'm out. So I'm gonna watch that line.
Yeah. I think we all, though, as Christians, have that to some level. Like myself, excuse me. Myself, for example, I had what was it? I've had those moments where I feel like if I started to not do the right things, not live the right way, that especially when I started living the right way, and then I'm like, well, if I go back to this way, I feel like I was afraid something bad would happen to me, like, you know, more what it was regular life. You know, those events in regular life that just pop up, and it gets to a snowball effect where everything comes down on you at once. And I've been there. I felt that way before. I don't know if that's similar to you or, you know, people you help coach or not.
Yeah, I love a couple of the things that you said where it's like our natural tendency to want to follow those rules, and that's not a bad thing. It's the challenge and the problem comes when we start measuring our worth by like how well did I do today? Like we all have, whether we like have physically have it or not, we have like this checklist that we kind of play this game with where we say like, okay, read my Bible. Yeah, I prayed in the morning where I'm like supposed to do that in the morning, not like wait until the rest of the day. So I got that checked today. I helped someone. Maybe I shared my testimony with someone. I shared the gospel or showed up in the ministry, whether it's your podcast or your church ministry. Like we all have like whatever's on our good list. I didn't yell at my kids today or whatever. Like we all
Yeah.
have this like good checklist. And when we start measuring our worth, like, "Whew, today I did okay. I got like most of it checked off," or on the days where we don't have very much checked off, we feel really defeated and like, "Oh, I'm just so worthless." And we let it say something about our value. And the key is getting to the point where our worth and our value stems from the fact that we are loved by God. Like that is what speaks to our value. And the rest of it flows from that rather than like trying to measure. And then something else you said was really important, that it's just life happens. A lot of times we assign meaning to something
Hmm.
that doesn't need meaning. Like we make up a story, like, man, I got into a car accident. That means I must have done XYZ wrong. Or this thing that I was trying to do, it didn't take off the way that I wanted it to. That must mean that I'm not a good enough fill in the blank. We can make up these stories about our value and our worth when really it's just life happening.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean that does happen. People think, I've heard people say, "Oh, yeah, I got into a car accident that, or a few weeks ago, for me personally, I lost my brake lines in my car about a month or so ago. Good thing it happened at a fast food restaurant in the drive-thru and not when I really needed to stop or whatever. And so I thank God that happened, but maybe I could have been like, oh, geez, what did I do to cause this to happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a difference, because I do believe that, there does come a point where the wrath of God will be, not to sound like super bold, but will unleash on someone, but that's different because of how they are treating God, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know what would be the word, like people who atheists, I guess, people who
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think maybe not even how you're treating God, but I think they're intertwined. But how you're treating other people. God is just, and we want God to be just, but sometimes we want him to be just against other people first, like take care of theirs. But
Right.
God is just, and he will exact justice and judgment. But when we think about the way that God interacts with us, and he does use things to get our attention,
Mhm.
but like he could have used the brake line to get your attention, been like, I mean, whatever God is working in your life, but it sounds like he didn't, and you didn't have to over spiritualize it and make it a thing when it was just like a physical, your brake lines went out.
Right.
But when God speaks to us and he tries to course correct us and get our attention, number one, he uses good things to do that too. It's not always negative things. We can develop this idea that God is just like waiting to bap us when we mess up, when he wants our attention, when really I can tell you examples of like clients and myself where God used blessing to draw me closer to himself too.
Yeah.
And then even when he needs to offer a rebuke, there's always a way forward. If it feels condemning and like you're trapped, that's not from God. He's not going to just put a heavy burden on your shoulders. He's going to show you a way which is better. Like I think of even the woman that was caught in adultery. He said, go and sin no more. It was like, hey, I know that you did this. And everyone else was like, stone her, condemn her. If you're really God, you're going to do something about this. You're going to shame her. And Jesus didn't do that. He didn't ignore the situation completely. He dealt with their sin. We don't really know what he did, but he knelt down and wrote in the dust.
Right. Yeah.
But to her, he still addressed her problem, which could be any number of things, but he addressed it by saying, go and sin no more. So there was a way out. There was a way forward. So it's not going to be this like heavy judgment, like hammer falling type of situation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just like the old, I guess it's an old saying, I've heard people say that, God won't give you more than you can handle, and stuff like that. And I think too that that's kind of how Christian, especially American Christian culture, may have had it. I don't want to say they lack compassion, but it seems to me like there was a time where, it wasn't as compassionate as it is today. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the most judgmental people are the ones the most afraid of judgment. And it happens from person to person, but it happens with God too, where if you think that kind of critique and critical spirit is coming from God, we're going to have that towards ourselves, and we're going to have that towards other people also, which there's a very good distinction between a critical mind and a critical spirit. We need to be thinking. We need to be looking at things critically. We need to be asking questions, hard questions that we're really afraid of what the answer could be, but with a very soft and tender approach rather than a critical spirit, which is just looking for things to judge, looking for things to critique, and to look down on.
Well, and and I guess that's the point I kind of was trying to make is, if you think about a congregation as a whole, maybe there are times where the congregations would never ask questions. And if I think back to the, I'll use this as an example, the Catholic Church, kind of started the whole people who commit suicide go to hell thing. And, I think that's a wrong interpretation of that. I believe that we don't know where someone's final destination is because we don't hold the Rams Book of Life, number one, and we don't know where the person was at in their, obviously final moments. So I think there was a time where the church accepted that answer, but never really thought about that answer.
Yeah.
So you say you're a recovering achiever. What? I have an idea of what that means. I myself say that I'm a privileged Christian, or I grew up as a privileged Christian, and what that means is I grew up in a Christian home, always going to church on Sundays, that lifestyle. And so what is a recovering achiever?
Yeah. Oh, that's fun. So a recovering achiever to me is somebody who's willing to rest, somebody who's not trying to find their worth in their achievements. So when you're jostling and you're measuring and you're using that checklist, it's really easy to always feel like you have to be doing another thing. Like a recovering achiever knows that it's okay to have margin and not pack every day with good things that maybe aren't for you, that you can say no. A recovering achiever knows how to ask for help, because it's not all about what I can accomplish on my own or proving that I can get it by myself. I'm allowed to ask for help. So as we recover from this mindset of finding our worth in our accomplishments and finding our value there, we can gain confidence in our no's also. Like, no, that isn't for me. No, I don't have time to do that. No, I'm not going to measure my worth by how much I get done. And we can stop trying to do all of the things and be all of the things and wear all of the hats and zone in on what God actually has for us. So many of us are living lives that are, I want to come up with a better term for this because I don't mean it to be like rude, but I was there where I was just living a status quo life, average, and average was okay. And now I look at my life and I'm like, I don't want average. I don't want to be living the quote unquote American dream where I work till I'm 65 and then retire for, for 15 years. And like, that doesn't light me up inside, or doing what I'm quote unquote supposed to do. Like, what is actually God calling me to do? There can be so many of those good things, whether it's the ministries or the way that you serve in your community or your church, that is like prescribed. And we forget to stop in and check in with ourselves and be like, wow, what actually lights me up? Because those desires that God has placed in your heart are a gift. They actually are arrows to point your path forward, rather than like, oh, my desires are like evil and sinful automatically, just like we get this attitude that we should be almost penitent about it. And that's not the word, but like we should be going the opposite of what we want because it would be selfish to do what I want. And a recovering achiever knows that I get to actually follow what I want to do. And that's not necessarily unholy. God can use the way that He's designed us intentionally on purpose. We don't have to be like somebody else or fit the mold in order to be a good Christian or a good Jesus follower. Those desires that have been placed inside of us are on purpose. So instead of trying to fit in, instead of trying to achieve what somebody else says is right for what your life is supposed to look like, we can start following the things that light us up and finding our passion and our calling and our mission in those things. And yeah, are there going to be things that we don't like to do that we're going to have to do that God is actually going to use to stretch us? Absolutely. But when we're chasing those things, it's kind of a fool's errand to be like, I don't think we do this consciously, but to be like, well, I actually want to do this, but instead I'm going to do this because we've elevated self-sacrifice to a position of completely dismissing maybe what God is actually stirring inside of us because we're denying our desires.
Yeah. Would you say, and now when you say you're a recovering achiever and everything, would you say is it overachieving, or is there a difference between achieving and overachieving?
That's a great question. Yeah. I've heard like recovering overachiever before too. But I don't know if that resonated with me as much. It might resonate with somebody else, but overachieving, I didn't know I was overachieving. I was just going. I was just doing all of the things. And so, yeah, am I a recovering overachiever? Probably. But I'm also resonate with recovering achiever because of the whole worth and value thing. Like my identity now is more grounded in who I am and whose I am and what God says about me than what I can do.
Yeah. So you talked about breaking the mold and everything. So when did you realize that mold could be broken and you didn't have to live how other people may have wanted you to live or had to fit in that status quo society?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question so much. So one of the big moments for me was when God was calling me to start my business. So the mold that I had been handed and that I adopted for being a wife and mom, that was like the way to do it was to be a stay-at-home mom and a homeschool my kids. So owning a business or starting anything outside of that felt wrong. And God cyclically brought this desire to me when my babies were sleeping through the night. It was really unique. So every couple of years, because I had my kids close together, this desire would come up inside of me to just do something more.
Mm-hmm.
And I squashed that so hard. And the last time that it happened, when my youngest was born, I just remember her being just a few months old and crying and asking God to take this desire away from me because I was convinced that it was like somehow sinful, that I wanted to do something else. And I had somehow never told my husband that I had wrestled with this multiple times. But I told him that time and he got so excited. He was like, that would be amazing. And he immediately like prayed over me and God would show me an idea of some business to start. And that was such a breakthrough moment for me that I could break that mold of not having or not being only a stay-at-home mom, which is some women's calling, but it wasn't mine. And I could break out of that mold. And now my daughter goes to public school. And if you'd have told me that 5 years ago, I would have like thought you were crazy that I would have done that. But there's so many molds that God had to break me out of. But that one where I started my business, or just even was willing to look at starting a business, was huge for me. And that kind of ties right back into that desire. God had given me that desire, or at least he was letting that desire nurture inside of me, and he was like nudging me towards it. And I got to break out of that mold and help other people. And now I can see that my mission and calling is more diverse than just one avenue through my family. It's
Right.
through coaching as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is how kind of the podcast for me came to be as well. About 3 years ago or so, I knew that I was going to be called to something. I wasn't sure what yet, and after a couple years of struggling and getting through, the pandemic and everything like that, I finally found that I felt like I was led to be doing this podcast, and so I can definitely relate there. It was something similar. I mean, I've been developing this show since February, and that's kind of like I had the same situation where I knew I wanted to do something, I didn't know what, and God kept saying or putting the podcast in my head, over and over again. And now we're here.
I love it.
So,
hey, Jared, I don't know if you're recording on a different.
I am.
Okay. Perfect.
Yes, I get that. I get that question.
I don't know. It just took me half an hour to notice.
Yeah, I get that question. I had that question last week. My last guest, I started and I hit the record button on my app, and he's like, "Wait, are you recording?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't see the red light." And I was like, "Oh well, if I knew that was a thing," and so.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I've recorded full episodes without recording.
Yeah, it's definitely for me. I've been, I used to stream a lot of games and stuff, so I'm still using the old software because that's what I'm more comfortable with. and everything.
Awesome.
And so I just haven't really looked into using Zoom to record.
Yeah, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. So I wish I could flash a record button on the screen though, yeah, where so you're talking about this checklist and checking the boxes, and how would it make you feel when you felt like you couldn't check a box or check multiple boxes?
Yeah. It made me feel defeated. It made me doubt everything. Like, maybe I'm not even saved. Like, maybe I'm not even a Christian. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And how actually, let's go back to your kids for a second. How do you instill this into your kids? How do you work that in to maybe conversations that you have with them, or wanting to know that, hey, you don't need to check these boxes, so that maybe they don't go through some of the same things you've experienced?
Yeah. So the world and any other religion can teach us morals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, depending on your values, maybe you don't want the world teaching your kids some more morals, but for the most part, like, your kid's teacher is going to teach them manners, right? So are we here for behavior modification, or are we here to teach them something different? Because that's what religion will do, teach them behavior modification. So to like practically answer your question, we want to point our kids towards grace. We want to point our kids towards, what does following Jesus look like? Because it's different than just changing our behaviors. And one of the ways that we've done this, I did this with my oldest the most. I thought about, I should bring it back because my youngest is about the same age that we started this with my oldest, but teaching them practically that we love them when they're naughty and we love them when they're good. Like, asking this question a lot. Like, do I love you even when you scream at your sister? Or do I love you even when you won't listen? Like, instilling that over and over and over again until somehow it clicks. Because I think it takes a while for us to understand, like, when I messed up, I'm still secure. I'm like, God isn't going anywhere. My parents aren't going anywhere, right? So teaching them God loves you when you're good and he loves you when you're naughty is one of the ways that we've taught them grace and God's unconditional love.
Yeah, because there are some very few. I mean, I've run across, in fact, I had this conversation with my pastor last night. We were talking about, I guess, in a sense, the differences between conditional and non-conditional love and what that could actually do for a person's psyche, or for children growing up. And in the particular situation we were talking about, having someone come in like a foster kid or an adopted kid to a situation where they went from being on love to conditional love, and how that really, can mess with them.
Yeah. I think I'm still trying to untangle all of that, honestly, from the way that I looked at who God was and how that impacted my relationship with him, myself, and others.
Yeah. How was that transformation? Where you went from who you thought God was to who you found him out to be, someone who doesn't need any type of conditional love, that you can mess up and know that his grace is still there, and that there aren't rules that there are rules that we need to follow, but maybe the rules are less than what you thought.
Mm. Yeah, there were definitely less rules than I thought. Like, yeah, there was a lot of prohibition on so many things. But the shift in that was so freeing. Like freedom is one of the words I think of Galatians 6:1, which I can't quote off at the moment for some reason, but where Paul is just talking to them about like the not going back to the yoke of bondage because like we have been made free. We've been set free. And for God and me, it became secure. I don't know if you've studied attachment styles. I haven't much. I know just a little bit about it, but like it felt so secure. Like, okay, you're not going anywhere really. And it definitely, I needed some space to do what I think angsty teenagers just do naturally, but I was in my, mid-20s. But like, I need to be able to like push some buttons with God and be like, are we still okay? Oh, I guess we're still okay. Like and now I can tell God, like, hey, if this thing is true, like, I don't want anything to do with you. Like I can wrestle with questions that hard now. And I know I said that really fast because that's like really heavy. Like I can say those things and then I could be like, oh wait, yeah, God's not going anywhere. I'm allowed to ask those questions. I'm allowed to be me. I don't have to filter how I show up with God. Like he is so holy and we are called to fear and be reverent. But we get to the place where we're so proper with God that we don't even know. Like if somebody saw us the way that we pray, they wouldn't even recognize us because we just are so formal with the way that we treat God. So it shifted that I could be so open with God because he wasn't going anywhere. I could test those boundaries. What's his name? Eric Jackson wrote a book called Feral Christian. And he talks about those boundaries and pressing on those boundaries because a lot of us have been made domesticated in our faith, where we've been taught that this is our box that we have to stay in, and we don't know how to push those boundaries and figure out, is this a fence that God built that keeps me safe, or is this a boundary that society or the denomination I grew up in, or like the way that I'm viewing the world has set for me? And we can start pushing those boundaries and be like, where is actually what's right? So asking questions like, am I allowed to listen to rock music? Am I allowed to listen to music with a beat? Or like crazy things like that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that especially.
But yeah, it brought a lot of freedom and security to like summarize that answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I believe that like when was it is it in Matthew? Seek and you will find. And Paul in Hebrews wrote, Jesus is the same today, yesterday, and forever. So, like, if you're struggling with those boundaries or what is the Christian lifestyle, and you haven't really, you're critically thinking about it, but you don't go out and really test, like, you were saying, or don't really get your answers, that could ultimately, I guess, it could deter some away, but they were really, these questions that we have are really meant to draw us closer, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like you said, it can deter some of us, but they're really healthy for us.
Yeah. I love to critically think, like, and I think that's one of the issues is what's wrong with the world today is there's less of critical thinking, and and I don't think people stop and think about really what they're saying, or they're just grabbing a whole bunch of words and throwing it out there, and yeah, that sounds about right, and yeah, how does finding your self-worth with God, and we're in a world where men, women, they find their self-worth by different means. About what they see on social media is a big influencer, and stuff like that. So where can you draw a line on how social media, I guess, is influencing a person to where we need God to be the influence, or another Christian source? Like, where's that line in the sand?
Well, I think it's a very blurry line.
Yeah.
Do any of us really know where all of our influence is coming from? Carlos Whitaker, he says a quote, and I haven't looked it up, but he says that we consume, especially if we're like reaching for our phone first thing in the morning, we consume more content, I think, in the first hour or maybe two than our great-grandparents consumed in a month. So I don't think we yet, I mean, the studies are still so new or non-existent of the impact social media has on us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what level of influence is that having on us? But like where we are comparing ourselves, I think happens without us even recognizing it. If you're feeling like in a funk after like scrolling for a while, I guess that maybe you saw something that you're comparing yourself and you're feeling small, you're feeling less than, and you're not stepping into who God has made you to be because you're looking at what somebody else showed on their highlight reel, and you're like, man, I wish I could be that. And instead of like who God has created us to be. So where is that line? I think it's different for every person. Setting parameters around how much time we spend on social media is so helpful. Even putting parameters around how much time we spend reading other books versus spending time really alone with Jesus, like meditating and asking him to speak to us. Of course, we're in the Word, and Christian devotional books are so helpful, and other teachers, and listening to sermons and having healthy influences in our lives is so valuable, but it's often neglected. I have an episode coming out on my podcast, I think it's this week, talking about like ancient faith practices that we've so neglected and we forget they're there. And a lot of them have to do with contemplation and reflection and just being still, because we pray a lot talking and we forget to sit still and listen for God's answer. So when I say like spending time with Jesus in meditation, it's like speaking and pausing to listen. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, and I mean, it also depends too, if I think, so for me, I'll do both. Sometimes I'll pray, and just pray just to pray. And sometimes I'll pray and listen, and sometimes I'll sit in my car on my way to work, for example, and say, all right, God, we have a half hour, however long the drive is, and I'll turn the radio off and I'll say, what do you have for me? Pretty much. And I think that makes sense. And I think it's so hard because I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say. Um, like there's so many different types of Christian denominations out there and everything, and I think being it isn't always going to be uniformed, I guess, is what I'm saying. There are some denominations out there that believe in ritual prayer, like the Catholic Church and a few others. So I think, to sum it all up, like, I guess it depends on how you pray. Are you praying to communicate with God, or are you doing this out of the ritual experience?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And honestly, even us non-denominational / Baptists who are very not Catholic end up with our own rituals too, where we're just going through the motions. Yeah. So letting it be fresh and not comparing it to what somebody else's is, gaining information, looking at someone else's to see if we can learn something or implement something new. Absolutely. But like cutting the comparison and like it has to look a certain way is so freeing. And where I think that genuine real relationship and connection starts developing more.
Yeah. I think that's true. I guess maybe that's the grand scheme of what I was trying to say. For a quick example, I remember growing up in my church and the worship songs, the hymns that we would sing and everything, and then going to something like a camp or another church, and they have the cooler hip songs, and it makes you feel more, wanting to worship and stuff. And I remember a time where I was going to my church, and then I would go like to my mom's church, and I remember somebody saying, or heard that somebody had left the church who played in the worship band because they weren't getting enough spiritual fulfillment and everything. I'm like, really? Because what they have here is great, and it's better, and it's new, and it's exciting, and all of that. And yeah, I definitely, I guess, get that. But how do you give advice to Christians when we're not all the same, when we come from different denominational backgrounds? Like, how hard is that to kind of have wrap their heads around it, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's unique to look at all the different faith practices or the way that people approach their relationship with God. It is individual. And I mean, we can get into like, why do some people believe this and say it's from the Bible, and other people believe this and they say it's from the Bible? Like, oh, that can get like, what in the world is going on, right? Who's like, where's the Holy Spirit in both of these? But it comes down to individual liberty, and God has given us that. And it can be intimidating to be like, so and so says this, and I believe this. But if we're going to work well together for what actually matters, and I believe that what actually matters is the gospel and loving God with all our heart and loving other people as ourselves. Like those, if we can get back to basics, then the rest can be really fun, like icing on the cake. Somebody else is going to decorate it different. It's going to look different. It's going to attract different people. Like you said, like that one guy was like, I'm not getting fed here. And you're like, what? This is amazing. Like it didn't jive with him. And that's totally okay. And as we get more okay and secure with who we are, who God has made us to be, then we can let somebody else be who they are and who God has made them to be. And it can be really beautiful when we're not trying to jockey for position or the best or black and white. I'm right and you're wrong. Well, maybe I really believe the stance that I've landed on, That doesn't mean that I'm not open to hearing your opinion. Like that openness and that security, I think, is what's going to shift the culture
Yeah.
and needs to shift in the Christian culture in
Yeah.
America.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% that, I mean, part of me, like when I have conversations with other people, I'm open, I let them talk more than I would talk, only because I'm open to hear their ideas and stuff like that. And I think you're absolutely right. We need that. We need to get back to the basics of the gospel. I think it could get oversaturated. Like you said, there's so much. For example, one hot topic is, are women allowed to be pastors? And there's, sections of denominations that say yes, and there are sections that say absolutely not. But we're not getting back to pretty much the basic of life, if I could quote for him there, old song. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So so you started this business so what do you exactly do?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I coach and
Mm-hmm.
mentor, support women. So far, it's only been women, but all Christians, I think, can use this. But where I help you untangle the narratives that you've been given that have handed you a poor view of yourself and the confusion with like, is God actually angry with me? Like, do I have to fit this mold or else I'm out? And we can really get down to the bones of where those beliefs came from. We can flip them on their head and help you step into who you really are, like with confidence rather than trying to fit in. And be willing to follow God's calling, whether it leads you outside of the box that you thought God had for you, like my story of like even podcasting and preaching and having to like break out of that box. Um, that's what I help people do. Because the way that we get from trying really hard to fit in because we're desperate to belong and have value to confidence is that middle piece is having a strong foundation and relationship with God and owning our worthiness.
Good. What is the most common advice that you give or common problem that you see come in when you're trying to coach?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That people feel small and they feel less than and they compare themselves to other people. And the most tragic piece of that is when they think God signed off on it. When they think God is the one that said, you're not enough, or you need to like do these things to measure up. That's one of the biggest things that I want to help the world overcome, like one person at a time, helping them overcome that feeling small and feeling like they were designed to be playing small and to feel less than someone else.
Hmm. Do you have it? Did you ever have anyone come in and kind of feel like you did that they want to serve God, but they didn't know how and they didn't know where? And what kind of advice did you give for that?
Yeah. I love doing like breakthrough type sessions where we're going to flip the narrative on all of the things that have been spoken over you. If you feel like this is how you're supposed to do things, but I read a quote this week. I meant to jot down who said it, but if you feel like you have it all in life, like you look at your life and you're like, I have everything, but I'm not even happy. Chances are that you're living someone else's version of what life is supposed to look like.
Hmm.
You follow the rules, you check the boxes, you got the house, you got the spouse, you got the kids, you have the, the dream job or whatever, and you're still not happy and you feel like this discontent inside, there's this disconnect from where you're supposed to be, and you're living somebody else's dream that wasn't actually made for you. So where they're drawn to ministry, yeah, sometimes you're going to have to cut some things. You're going to have to cut out some things in your life because you're not meant to be spread thin. God doesn't get glory from your burnout. And you get to be meticulous and so intentional about the choices you make and the ways that you serve. And when we heal, your connection to God and your ability to hear his voice becomes even clearer and sharper, then you'll know where you're supposed to be, and he will guide you into what's meant for you, even in this season or maybe in the next season. And then you can minister without like spreading yourself thin and doing what everybody else thinks a good pastor's wife would do, or a good, you name it, would do.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are the keys for learning how to rest in God? I know you talked about that a little bit.
Yeah. The first thing is identity. Like, where are we finding that worth? Where are we finding our identity? Are we finding our worth in what we're doing? It's gonna be really hard to rest. And then overcoming the guilt that comes with resting. Those are the mental gymnastics that happen when you finally decide you're going to rest. And then inside is like, oh, but I should have done. Oh, but I didn't. Or, oh, but like that, like not resting. So overcoming that achieving and that guilt and reframing who God is. Like, does he actually want me to be producing all the time? Does he love me for what I produced? Am I more than my contribution? Because we feel like our only worth is what we bring to the table, right? When maybe actually it's who you are, because you're a human being, not a human doing. So those are some of the things that we can untangle in order to learn to rest in who God is and who he says we are, and let that be enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So, where can people find you? Like,
yeah. So I podcast on Abundant Grace is the name of my podcast, and I'm on social media. My favorite place to hang out is Instagram, so you can come over there, emily.abundantgrace. And if anybody wants to take this like to the next step and shift their way that they're showing up in the world and the way that they are valuing themselves, I would love to invite you to come take my challenge. It's a 4-day challenge where I email you the video and some songs that you can listen to and some questions to help you step into your identity as a son or daughter of God, and let that inform the rest of your world, the rest of your life. That's at yourrelationshipwithgod.com. And you can take the challenge and get to know me and my coaching style a little bit more, because you do not have to keep producing and finding your value in how well you conform to the people around you, because your value is actually in your uniqueness, not in your ability to like fit in.
Right. Well, Emily, great to have you on. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think I don't want to speak lesser of my other guests, but this is has been equally fun. I'll put it that way, as my other conversations I've had here on Stealingjune podcast. So yeah, I hope your business succeeds. I hope your podcast does well and everything, and I hope we can have you back on sometime to see how everything's going.
Thanks, Jared. It was great to connect with you.
Yeah. All right, guys. So till next time, I'm Jared, and this is Stealingjune podcast. See you later.
You have been listening to Stealingjune, a podcast. Stealingjune is a ceramic production and was created, written, directed and hosted by Jared Warren. For business inquiries, comments, or requests, please email us at ceramicprod@hotmail.com. That's SERAMICPROD All rights reserved. 2022. 1 Timothy 1:15.